For almost as long as people have known they were going to die, some of them have refused to accept it. Kings, priests, wandering mystics, swallowing strange mixtures, chasing a cure for the one thing no cure has ever touched. In 9th century China, this was not a fringe hobby. It was a serious craft. Learned men spent their lives blending minerals, certain that the right recipe would unlock a life without end. Here's the strange part. The most dangerous thing humans have ever mass-produced did not come out of a weapons shop. It came out of that search for eternal life. It began as a medicine, something meant to be swallowed, not fired. One of those batches mixed saltpeter, charcoal, and sulfur. Instead of granting endless life, it caught fire and tore itself apart. The Chinese called it huoyao, fire medicine. Even the name admits what it was, a drug, not a weapon. A thing invented to stretch life out forever became the most efficient tool we ever built for ending it. So how do you get from a failed immortality potion to the gun? To see why that potion turned on its makers so violently, look at what was inside it. The earliest written recipe we have comes from Song Dynasty China around the 11th century. Saltpeter, which is potassium nitrate, plus charcoal and sulfur in a rough ratio of about 75-15-10. The saltpeter is the key. When it heats up, it dumps out oxygen fast. That feeds a fire that burns almost instantly, and the burning throws off a sudden, violent punch of gas. That expanding gas is the whole secret. Everything gunpowder would ever do traces back to it, a hard shove of gas looking for somewhere to go. And here's what's easy to forget. For a long time, nobody pointed that shove at another person. The first real uses were beautiful. Fireworks. Colored smoke for signals. Noise and light for festivals. Exactly what you'd expect from people who found it while chasing eternal life, not from soldiers hunting for an edge. The gas that would one day drive a bullet through armor spent its early years painting the night sky. That changed when army commanders got a look at it. Somewhere between the 10th and 12th centuries, Chinese soldiers built the first real gunpowder weapon, and it was almost laughably simple. Take a tube of bamboo, pack it with powder, strap it to the end of a spear, light it when the enemy gets close. They called it the fire lance. Point it at a man and it spat flame and burning scraps into his face. Picture standing in a shield wall, trained your whole life to fight with steel, and suddenly the man across from you is holding a stick that breathes fire. Defenders used these at the siege of Dayan in 1132, and they worked, not just because they burned, but because they terrified. Then someone had an idea that changed everything. They started dropping bits of pottery and small pellets into the tube on top of the powder. Now the fire lance didn't just scorch you. It threw sharp things at you hard. That is the whole idea of a gun, sitting there inside a bamboo tube. Fire the powder, send something flying. But bamboo could only take so much. Push in more powder for more force and the tube split in your hands. So Chinese smiths cast tubes out of bronze, strong enough to hold the pressure. That gave them the hand cannon, a metal barrel that flung a single solid shot with real range. By the 13th century, these were common across China. They went bigger too, to weapons with names like the thunderclap bomb and the heaven-shaking cannon, loud enough to crack open strongholds that had felt safe for centuries. Then the Mongols arrived. When they invaded China in the 1200s, they ran straight into these weapons during sieges like the defense of Kaifeng in 1232, and it left a mark. But the Mongols didn't just get beaten by the new technology. They took it. Once they had conquered China, they carried gunpowder west with them, campaign after campaign, deep into Asia and toward the Islamic world. And this is the part worth sitting with. Those conquests worked almost like an accidental delivery service. War carried the recipe farther and faster than any trader or messenger ever could, spreading a Chinese invention clear across Eurasia in a few generations. By the middle of the 13th century, scholars in the Islamic world were writing gunpowder recipes down, and their words still carry the fingerprints of where it came from. They called saltpeter Chinese snow. Fireworks were Chinese flowers. Rockets were Chinese arrows. One quick branch because the story isn't a straight line. Alongside guns, Chinese engineers were also building rockets and fire arrows, gunpowder strapped to a shaft, and those spread on their own paths into Korea and India. That branch never really died. But our road follows the gun. Because when gunpowder finally reached Europe, it landed in a world it was about to tear apart. The gunpowder formula shows up in Europe around 1267 in the writings of an English friar named Roger Bacon. But a recipe on paper is not a weapon in your hands. Real guns don't take off in Europe until the 1320s and 1330s, and the first ones were crude iron tubes that fired stone balls, as likely to frighten as to kill. And yet, even ugly, even unreliable, these things broke something that had held for centuries. Think about what a knight was. A man in expensive armor on an expensive horse, trained since childhood, backed by a whole social order built to produce him. Now hand a cheap gun to a poorly paid foot soldier who trained for a few weeks. When that soldier's shot punches through the knight's breastplate, it doesn't care how much the armor cost or how noble the blood behind it. The gun didn't just kill knights. It made the entire world that produced them start to wobble. The walls felt it too. Tall stone castle walls had kept enemies out for generations. Cannons knocked them down. So engineers stopped building up and started building smart, low, thick, angled walls that could soak up a cannonball instead of shattering. The Star Fort. The Bastion. Fortresses shaped by the physics of gunpowder. An accident from a Chinese workbench was quietly redrawing the map of Europe, one fallen wall at a time. But two problems still stood between gunpowder and the weapon it would become. And the first one was hiding inside the powder itself. Here's a piece of the story almost nobody tells. The powder itself wasn't good enough yet. Give the Chinese full credit. Their accidental discovery lit the fuse for all of it. But the powder they used was mostly a dry mix, ground fine like flour, and fine dry powder had problems. Jostle it on a long march, and the heavy and light bits drifted apart so it stopped working right. Pack it tight in a barrel, and only the surface really caught, so a lot of the punch was wasted. Europe found the fix, and it sounds almost too simple. Sometime in the late 1300s and 1400s, powder makers started adding liquid. They ground the ingredients wet into a damp paste. They pressed that paste into hard cakes. They dried the cakes, broke them into little grains, and sorted the grains by size through sieves. The process got a name: corning. Why would wet, then dry, then crushed make such a difference? Because now there were tiny gaps between every grain. When the powder lit, hot gas rushed through those gaps and set the whole charge off almost at once, instead of burning slowly from the outside in. Corn powder could hit up to around 3 times harder than the old dusty stuff, and it did it fast and the same way every time. And they could tune it. Big grains burned slower, good for cannon. Small grains burned fast, good for guns. Over the next few centuries, right into the 1700s, corning got refined and industrialized until powder makers could turn out consistent grains by the ton. China handed the world the spark. Europe turned that spark into a reliable, mass-produced explosive. And that is what finally made the gun an infantry weapon. Better powder was only half the answer. The other half was the gun itself, the tube. Early European guns were made one of two ways. Some were forged from iron, strips hammered together and bound with hoops like a wooden barrel made of metal. Others were cast from bronze in one piece. Bronze usually came out better, honestly, because nobody had really figured out how to make a strong iron barrel yet. And a weak barrel meant you couldn't trust it with a big charge. So the early guns were monsters. A matchlock musket could weigh around 25 pounds. You couldn't just raise it and aim. You had to prop the barrel on a forked stick jammed into the ground and steady it there. Imagine trying to fight while balancing a small tree. Then two things came together. Corned powder burned faster, so you needed less of it for the same push, which meant lower pressure inside the barrel. And barrels slowly got better made. Put those together and they helped make something possible that had seemed out of reach, a gun light enough to actually hold and swing. Which brings us to the part everyone pictures when they think of an old gun: the lock. Everything so far still had one clumsy problem: actually lighting the thing. Early on, you needed 2 hands and a lot of luck, one to hold the gun, one to touch a burning cord to a little hole at exactly the right moment, all while someone was trying to kill you. The first fix arrived in the late 1400s, the matchlock. A slow-burning cord sat in a little curved clamp. Pull the trigger, the clamp dipped the glowing cord into the priming powder, and the gun fired, leaving both your hands free to aim. It sounds small. It was huge. For the first time, one trained soldier could point a gun and actually mean it. The matchlock traveled fast. The Ottomans built it into their elite Janissary troops. Portuguese traders carried it to Japan in 1543, where local smiths, making the Tanagashima, refined it into some of the finest guns in the world. And China, where this whole story began, ended up buying back an improved version of its own invention to fight raiders on its northern border. The circle closed on itself. But a matchlock needed an open flame burning at all times. A useless in the rain. A dead giveaway in the dark. So the search for a better spark kept going. The wheel lock, early 1500s, spun a rough wheel against stone to throw sparks, no more lit cord, perfect for a rider on horseback, though it was expensive and fiddly to build. The real winner was the flintlock, worked out around 1610 to 1615 by a French gunsmith named Marin Le Bourgeois. A piece of flint, clamped in a hammer, struck steel and dropped sparks straight onto the powder. Fast, reliable, no flame to babysit. By the late 1600s, now that powder and barrels had caught up, armies handed flintlocks to nearly everyone. It would rule the battlefield for 200 years. One more piece clicked in. The socket bayonet, which slid around the barrel so the gun still fired with the blade attached. Suddenly, every soldier was both a musketeer and a spearman. No more separate rows of pikemen to guard them. One man, two weapons. For all that progress, though, there was still one thing these guns were genuinely bad at. Hitting what you aimed at. Here's the thing about a smooth barrel. A ball rattles down it and comes out spinning any which way, wobbling off target. Gunsmiths had known the fix since about 1500. Cut spiral grooves inside the barrel. The grooves grip the ball and spin it like a thrown football, and a spinning shot flies straight and far. That is rifling. So why did soldiers spend 300 more years with smooth barrels that missed? Because rifling had a brutal catch. To grip those grooves, the ball had to fit tight, so tight you had to hammer it down the barrel with a mallet. And every shot left more grime inside, until it barely went down at all. Fine for a hunter with all day and one careful shot. Impossible in the chaos of a battle. So rifles stayed a specialist's tool. Hunters. Sharpshooters. Never the men in the firing line. The lock finally broke in 1449 with a French officer named Claude-Étienne Minier, building on others before him. His bullet was clever. He made it a little smaller than the barrel, so it dropped in easy and fast, like a smoothbore ball. But it had a hollow base. When the powder went off, the blast shoved that hollow open, spreading the soft lead out to bite into the grooves on the way out. Easy to load. Spun on the way out. For the first time, a whole army could have a rifle's accuracy at a musket's speed. On the battlefields of the Crimea and the American Civil War, that meant men dying at distances no one was ready for. And here's the cruel joke. Just as the rifled musket reached its peak, it was already dying. It fell in stages and fast. First the percussion cap, early 1800s, a tiny metal cap of shock-sensitive chemical that popped the instant a hammer hit it. No more loose priming powder, no more flint, no more waiting on the weather. In a few decades, it made every older lock, match, wheel, and flint obsolete. Then came the bigger blow. Loading from the back. A German gunsmith, Johann von Dries, built a rifle you loaded at the breech instead of ramming everything down the muzzle. Prussia adopted his needle gun in 1841, and its whole cartridge, powder, primer, and bullet in one paper package dropped in from behind. A soldier could reload lying down several times faster. When Prussia crushed Austria at Königgrätz in 1866, the rest of the world took notes. Within a couple of decades, self-contained metal cartridges were everywhere, and every muzzle-loading gun on Earth was scrap. One problem was left, and it was as old as gunpowder itself. Smoke. Black powder coughed out thick clouds that blinded the shooter and marked his position, and it caked the barrel with filthy residue, so armies raced to replace it. In 1884, a French chemist, Paul Vier, cracked it, a new powder about 3 times stronger than black powder that burned almost clean, with barely any smoke. 2 years later, it went into the Lebel rifle, the first military gun to use smokeless powder, and a repeater that fed itself from a tube of cartridges. That was the late 1880s. From there, the modern firearm was basically here. Step back and look at the whole climb, from a bench in 9th century China to a smokeless repeater 8 centuries later. And the strangest thing about it is that no one designed it. Nobody woke up one morning and invented the gun. A handful of people looking for eternal life mixed the wrong thing and nearly blew themselves up. Soldiers saw the blast and thought, what if we aimed that? And then for 800 years, one small fix after another. Bamboo to bronze, dusty powder to corned grains, an open flame to a spark to a tiny popping cap, a smooth barrel to a spinning one, loading from the front to loading from the back. Each step just solved the annoying problem the last one left behind. No lone genius. Just hands passing the thing along. Chinese engineers, Mongol riders, Ottoman soldiers, Japanese smiths, European craftsmen, each one adding a little. And it all started with people who wanted the opposite of a weapon. They weren't chasing power or conquest or a better way to kill. They were chasing more life, a way to never die. The most efficient machine we ever built for ending life was born from the dream of never ending it at all.